Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is a really special event for us. It's a kickoff of a new chapter for Chatham, a chance for us to honor the legacy of our treasured alum, Rachel Carson, in a whole new way. This past week, we launched the new Rachel Carson Visiting Scholars Program with our very first visiting scholar. And this is going to be an opportunity to bring national and international experts on all of the key areas we've identified in the strategic plan for the Falk School and Eden Hall campus to Chatham. So looking at local food systems, sustainable business, conservation ecology, and natural resources, and how to build inclusive and sustainable local communities. And in addition to that, we'll be trying to bring artists who will focus on environmental writing and other aspects of the arts to Eden Hall. We think that we've already seen this week with our first guest that this brings an infusion of new ideas, inspiration for our students, and a chance for our faculty to interact with leading experts from around the world. We're fortunate that tonight's program has been made possible by a generous gift from another distinguished Chatham alum, Betsy Prime, the class of '61, and her husband Charles, who established the Rachel Carson Sustainability and Environment Lecture Series at Chatham University, which is helping to underwrite tonight's event. With the growing severity of the climate crisis, the impact that it's having on biodiversity, both here locally and around the world, and on food insecurity and the environment around the planet, I think the timing of this series is particularly important. We hope will be a stimulus for what we've been seeking to do at Chatham, which is to develop a whole new generation of Rachel Carsons who can carry on her legacy and be real advocates for change to create a more sustainable future. We're proud of what we've done so far at Chatham to advance this over these last years with the creation of the greenest campus in the U.S., the Falk School for the Environment, that is already one of the leading 10 producers of graduates in sustainability and food studies. And I'm really honored and excited to be going next month to the UN Global Climate Summit in Egypt, where I'll have a chance to interact with leading experts from around the world and university peers to try to move this agenda forward. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our guest tonight's good friend and our dean of the School of the Falk School of Sustainability and Environment and the Eden Hall campus, Lou Leonard.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out for today's event. Rachel Carson seized the attention of the world 60 years ago, and she hasn't let go since. And she was able to do this because, more powerfully than really anyone before her, she was able to speak at this crossroads of human culture, science, and scientific sort of fact. And I think understanding this power of narrative and science and how they come together. And our guest today embodies those two powerful qualities and their intersection. I first met Zig Plotter almost 30 years ago, somehow. And already then he was a giant in American conservation. And he drew young people like me who wanted to contribute to a world that even then was already bending towards crisis. By that time, Professor Plotter had already argued what remains the most significant endangered species case ever to come before the United States Supreme Court, a case with facts that would have daunted most advocates. So on the one side, we had a nearly complete federal dam project that was part of one of the most powerful forces in the American South, the Tennessee Valley Authority. and on the other hand was a fish that was smaller than your index finger. Not many people would have taken that case. But as impressive as the victory was, more impressive was how Zig Plotter, then a young law professor at the University of Tennessee, brought the case together. And he did that largely through the support of a team of students. And he did so also with a combination of that gripping storytelling and understanding the relentless power of the facts if you bring them to bear. As his career progressed, and boy, did it ever progress, he went on to head the legal task force of the state of Alaska's Commission on the Exxon Valdez oil spill. He contributed to the toxic contamination case in Woburn, Massachusetts, which led to both the book and the movie A Civil Action. He's written one of the most widely used legal textbooks in any topic, in his case in environmental law. And he's more recently led a group of students to petition the US government around the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The list goes on. But no matter how much he achieved, Zig Plotter never stopped believing in the power of students, not as embryonic potential future actors, but as powerful agents of change right now. Right then. I was lucky 30 years ago to be one of those students, and it made all the difference in my career. And so I'm honored to welcome Professor Zygmunt Plotter here today as our inaugural Rachel Carson visiting scholar, Zig Plotter.
This dangling shows that I'm an older person. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, David, and thank you, Chad, and thank you to the Pryans for creating this wonderful honor that I have the first Rachel Carson Scholar, but I owe it to, it's almost nepotism. The reason why if I'm ever a good student, it's because I get incredible students. And this one, from the very beginning, he was teaching as a faculty member at Boston College before he graduated from the law school in a program that we actually might bring here for some of the reasons that you were talking about. I'm told that I should have some connections that I can talk about to Pittsburgh. And I have I grew up in the state of Eagles, Phillies, which is a different part of Pennsylvania. And so don't tell my friends that I actually was enjoying myself in Pittsburgh. But my father, Konstanty was a Polish diplomat. He was here at the consulate in Pittsburgh. And he'd like to get away from civilization and the fact that there was a coming war, and would drive in the countryside to see the forests, the water, the wildlife. And he met a kind of wildlife he'd never seen before. He was driving with a friend, Peggy Nelson, north of here in a forest, walking in a forest. It could have been Stanford Hill. Wouldn't it be cool if it had been Eden Hall? And a little animal with black and white stripes came running out in front of him, and Peggy's dog ran and jumped on this, and so he met a skunk, and they drove in a car just completely infiltrated with skunk all the way back to Pittsburgh. So I wouldn't say that is a perfect introduction to Pittsburgh, but a very interesting introduction to a piece of wildlife you don't know. But the second was, he and Peggy came to a party here in Pittsburgh. He said there were wonderful parties here in Pittsburgh. Um, a party, I think, given by a friend who spoke French. His English was terrible. And she had a roommate from England. And so during the party, when Peggy was perhaps going to the powder room, that roommate came in, sidled up to my father, and became my mother. So I have a very special linkage here. I grew up, that's Stanford Hill. That could be where the skunk was. You have skunks, right? Yeah. Yes, all right. And that's the farm that I grew up on. The Delaware River's in the background. And it was a wonderful place to grow up when the world was falling apart. Poland, as you know, was swallowed up by Russia. I began to be an environmentalist there, though I didn't know it. I loved fishing. In a little brook, you can see one of the valleys there. There were two brooks. One of them got poisoned by a landfill of Philadelphia's toxic waste. Put it somewhere where there's a disempowered community. The other, is it called chemical batching? We thought it was a mafia outfit. It was, and it poisoned the second stream. But there was we didn't use the word environment. I don't know if you remember, the first time I remember seeing the word environment applied to nature was in 1967. And there was no word sustainability. And there, of course, was no Falk School of Sustainability at that point. But then I read Rachel Carson, and millions of people read Rachel Carson. If it hadn't been in the New Yorker first and then published and really took off, my career and the career of many hundreds of people would at least have been delayed. And here I am. So thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Chatham, and thank you, Pennsylvania's College for Women. Is that right? So I'm trying to think how to frame what is, I was collecting a number of different perception stories, getting from the students and from the faculty at Eden Hall, but I'm not sure, can you stay for 5 hours? So what I thought I would do is think of the theme of environmental governance and see what I can make of it. And I thought I would start with the fact that a statute is an unguided missile. It's often created out of disaster or perception of disaster, and it often is written so as not to be particularly effective. They are brought to bear by active citizens who have not yet graduated from school, perhaps. The point being, that's what made Clean Air, Clean Water, the Toxics and the Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. And I was communicating with Aparna, and she mentioned post-Dust Bowl. There's a very interesting Soil Conservation Service case that I'd like you to see. The Soil Conservation case is a federal agency that was to stop the raindrop so that there would not be the erosion and dust of the Dust Bowl. But they were too good, so they had to find something else to do. And so now it was take the raindrop and get it away as fast as possible. So we're looking now at a wetlands drainage project in North Carolina, and it's Chicode Creek. And this isn't actually Chicode Creek, but this is what it looked like. Although there were farms about 150 feet back on either side. But as you can see, it's a beautiful stream. It actually was a little bit cluttered with some logs and stuff, but it was appreciated by the local farmers as a reminder of a place where deer and wildlife could live. But this is what the Soil Conservation Service wanted to do with it. It's a dragline, do you see, or a bulldozer, and it now looks perfect because there's no nature to get in the way of seeing the work of the federal agency. So it seems that This momentum is fed by a governance system, a powerful agency, and I want you to know that most of the land around Chilkoot Creek was the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company. But because the Soil Conservation Service did not respond to the farmers who said, look, that's going to lower the water table. What happens in the summer when the water table goes down? They have to buy irrigation if they can. But there were, I think, more than 100 farmers. But Weyerhaeuser had 3 times the acreage. And the agency went with Weyerhaeuser and said, we're going to do this, and the farmers are going to help pay for it. The farmers called 3 people who were at my law school, who were determined to follow Rachel Carson. And they had been told at first that it was just a fad. But the science of Silent Spring was so persuasive that the young people, who they could have gone to Wall Street. The farmers heard about the little group they were putting together. They called it the Natural Resources Defense Council. It now is more than 3 people. but the farmers heard about them. They came down, they walked around, and they saw, and they also looked at a drainage project that had been done and said, there's an angle on this because of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, which was never in law school. We had no idea of it because it had just been passed when they graduated. But let me give you a sense of this statute. It was signed by Richard Nixon along with 18 other major environmental statutes. The greatest environmentalist the greatest environmental signer there has ever been, because he was told that there might be a problem getting reelected, and the midterm elections also were important. So this is one of the things he signed. It's the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. It was signed on January 1st, 1970. But anyway, but see if you can pick something up. It's the Declaration of National Environmental Policy. Okay, now look at some other things. It said at first, the Congress authorizes and directs that all agencies shall. Oh no, but they insisted that we put in the phrase, this was Wayne Aspinall, the lobbyist for the American timber industry, and he did a little stuff for oil and gas as well, to the fullest extent possible. Well, all right, all right. But down below, it used to say, you have to do a finding of fact by the responsible official on these various things. By the way, this was written by a political scientist, and it's like poetry. It gave them 5 things to talk about, but it was, no, don't do that, because that could be litigated. That could be taken to court. So no, it'll be just a detailed statement. And up above it said, the Congress declares that each person has a right to a healthful environment. Do you see how dangerous that is? Because somebody could claim, if I have a right, I have a remedy. So it became, Congress recognizes that each person should enjoy a healthful environment. Do you get the idea? This statute was not intended to do anything, but it was taken by these young people and said, well, there has to be a detailed statement. And this was one of the very first cases. You may have written about it. And they went down to North Carolina, and old Judge Lorcan said, I don't know about this environmental case. And they said, yes, sir, this is a statute that is trying to save the environment, and it does require a detailed statement. And they turned to the agency, do you have a detailed statement? And they said, no, conservation is our middle name. Soil Conservation Service. So we don't have to do that. And the judge said, well, it says all federal agencies. So they went and they did an environmental statement. You can imagine, we're going to do wonderful things for the environment. We're going to make it even better than God. It's going to have a water level that will allow them to plow a few weeks earlier. Of course, it was going to lower the water table as well. In any event, the young law graduates learned what I call is the art of the quibble. They said, it says there are going to be effects on fish, but they don't know that Pamlico Sound is a major fishing area, and they have no detail about what it's going to do. It's talking about displaced, and in any event, and then they said, and the detailed statement says that the raw earth from the bulldozing and so forth will be treated with kudzu. You put in a seed every once in a while. Do you know that the kudzu is this? It's coming apparently to Pennsylvania, but it's not quite here yet. My students in Tennessee measured 17 inches in one day. It's going in every direction. And then at the first frost, all the leaves die, but it doesn't. To get rid of it, it costs thousands of dollars probably tens of thousands per mile. You have to inject it with an intravenous shot 3 years running, or have specially trained goats to come and eat it again and again. I mean, the environmentalists down south said, don't do this, but the road commissions did it. It was a disaster. The judge said, kudzu, that is awful, because North Carolina is being, oh, let me see. Yes, I put it there. That's kudzu in North Carolina. It goes over houses as well. Mothers have to close the bedroom windows for their children so the children don't get strangled in the night. So old Judge Larkins didn't know anything about environment, but he was showed by these quibbles and by kudzu that this statute could mean something, and by God, it would. Judges around the country bought in to the idea of protecting public welfare using laws that could be used. They bought in. Unfortunately, many of the judges now have been bought. And one of the troubles we'll have is talking about how the courts as leverage continue to be a question. But in any event, all right, subsidiarity. Why did I put that there? Because I wanted to talk about oil spills. And I wanted to talk about the Exxon Valdez oil spill, because it's far enough in the past that the politics are a little bit more neutral than they might be otherwise. Subsidiarity is levels of governance. And it's where are the decisions made from, top or down to the bottom, and where does information for the decisions come from the bottom to the top? Well, we'll see that what we do in seminars is not what human beings do in the governance system we have. That's the oil spill. Oh, those are some of my students who worked on the oil spill. I said, I need 5 students, no money, no credit, and I got 17. My chairman of the commission said, what are you feeding your students? We got more input from your environmental law students than any non-governmental agency. In any event, so do you see the North Slope of Alaska? Oh my goodness, I scaled it down. The North Slope is actually another 200 miles north of the red dot. And it's 800 miles of pipeline over 2 mountain ranges, and it traces over the seismic centers of most of the earthquakes that have occurred in Alaska over the last 50 years. And it comes down to Valdez, which is a fjord town, where it's put into ships. And some of it goes to Cherry Point in Seattle, but most goes down to Long Beach in California, where you can have your refinery belching out all kinds of pollutants, because it's all right. The people who live there are all low income and mostly minorities. You get my point, that environmental justice is there almost every time you look at a controversy. All right, so it turns out that that's the pipeline coming down off a mountain to fjord of Valdez, and the ships could come very close to the shore to load up. And then they would come out that channel and go down to Los Angeles. Oh, and there's a tank farm. You can't see the pipeline, but it feeds the hot oil into those tanks. I thought that I was going to be able to see the pipeline, but it was too cloudy. Now let me tell you something about ships. Because now we're going to a story that you may have heard of, what caused the Exxon Valdez oil spill? It was a drunken captain. Okay, but let me tell you something about his ship. This was the ship before it got repainted. If you look at it carefully, you can see 11 compartments. Do you see the lines that go up and down? So when you fill it with oil, you filled 11 compartments, so it didn't slosh back and forth. But holding it all together, oh, by the way, this is 3 football fields long. Actually, a little bit more than that. It's 315 meters or something like that, right? And it turns out that it's a single hull. And when it was new, it was 1 1/8 inches thick. And then, it's rusting a bit. And that's what held the boat together. Okay? And it turns out that shouldn't have been. But Jimmy Carter had to make the decision. Do you double hull or single hull? The commandant of the Coast Guard came in and said, Mr. President, double hulls in certain cases can actually be more tippy. So you should go with single hulls, which are something like 40% cheaper than a double hull. And so Carter said single hull. And the commandant actually retired that week, and the next week began his new position as president of Exxon Shipping. So do you see, we're talking about a human system that gets really quite Byzantine in the way governance occurs. But let me tell you one other thing. This ship was designed to be run by 36 seamen. Sea persons, I suppose, is what we would say. But then we would say seamen. All right. And it turns out that BP down in Houston, the company that dominated the Alyeska Consortium, there were 7 companies, but BP had 51%. And I tried to get BP into our report, but they didn't want it to be mentioned in any event. And a business person at BP said, you know, every seaman costs us $250,000 a year in ground support and training and whatever. So we would save a quarter. You don't need 36, so it went to 35. But then the next person came in, and this kind of like Tragedy of the Commons, and oh, you could save $250,000. Do you know how many people were sailing the ship? 16. And here's the other problem. They were supposed to turn it around in Valdez, and they were supposed to load the ship themselves because there had been an expert loading crew, but it had been let go for the same reason. All right, just think of the ship now. What if you load the middle compartments before you load the bow and the stern? Do you see what my fingers are doing? Crack, bang, with a single hull, bang, it's gone, right? Or if you load the stern and the bow, the middle floats up. But they said we can save $4 million a year by getting rid of the 3 shifts a day, the expert loaders. The crew will load the ship themselves because if they do it badly, they'll die. And that was exactly the way they decided to do it. But the crew in Valdez that night had to load the ship at the same time that it had to sleep. And so most of them did not get sleep. And by the time they turned around, there was only one that was awake enough to steer the ship. There were supposed to be 3 to steer the ship out of Valdez. All right, so now you're set up for the delights of a system, a mega system that obviously is making decisions in a way that potentially could cause a catastrophe. And as it left around 9 o'clock at night, a fisherman I know, she's actually a PhD for marine biology, but she's a skipper of one of the cod boats, called into the Valdez municipal government and said, "You've been worried about an oil spill. The question isn't if there's going to be a big one. It's only when it's going to happen." And so she said that, and she wasn't able to fly in, so it was by radio telephone. And the boat went out through the Narrows. And oh, do you see those white spots? What are those white spots? Did you see? They're coming from that white thing up in the upper left. What is that?
Icebergs.
What icebergs? I think you call it calving off a glacier. That's a Columbia glacier. So the guy up there said, "Uh-oh, I'm going to have to go farther to the port, to the left side, because the right side is getting these bergs." And he phoned that in. And he was very sleepy, and he put it on autopilot. And the ship went on. And when his replacement came up, and she had not much sleep, but she said, "This is supposed to be way over to our left, and unfortunately it's to our right, and to turn one of these things takes 2 miles." So, bang. And it ripped. I've flown over it in a helicopter. You look down into the ocean. The rocks aren't above the water, but below you see these claws of granite that just ripped 4 of the... And the captain came running up because he was not at the deck. Why not? He was downstairs doing the bursars. The bursar is a treasurer of the financial reports on the turnaround in Valdez. Why wasn't the bursar doing it? Oh, the bursar had been let off to save money. So the captain was down there not because he was drunk, but because he was doing the job of someone who had been let off. Now, anyway, the spill happened, and for a day, the wind didn't blow. And the fishermen who had known that this could happen went to the headquarters of the Coast Guard and Exxon that was set up and said, "What are you doing here? You're not official. Get out of here." And the fishermen said, "The wind has just started. Do you know what that means?" And they said, "No. And you haven't boomed it. Why haven't you boomed it?" "Well, the boom is under snow in Valdez, and the boat that takes the boom out is in Seattle getting its propeller fixed." The fisherman said, "Get the boom out. We will lay it for you. But it's too late to capture the oil around the Exxon." They could have done it. They had 24 hours. They could have done it. But the fishermen were the ones, and interesting, they said, "The currents go this way." Do you know which way the officials didn't know which way the currents flowed, right? That is a nesting area for endangered birds. That's a seal pup place. And fishermen hate seals, but they said, you have to protect that. And that, as you can see, it went 1,100 miles of coast coated with oil, killing really virtually almost everything it hit. As you can see, we tried to clean some of them, but it was really a token. It really was just, and so, I had more hair then. So the Vice President of the United States had walked on that the day before, and the rocks looked clean. But when the Vice President left, the oil came back up with the tide. And so it was a cosmetic thing so that the TV would not see the scope of the disaster. But by the way, this was taken a few years ago. You pull a rock, there still is oil down it's heartbreaking. But there they are spraying so that the cameras will look at it and say that it's clean. The workers, one of them in particular I talked with, he said, "I'm peeing blood. We're all peeing blood." I said, "What?" He said, "The stuff we're spraying to cut through the oil, they were either breathing it." You have health people who would know better than I, but I'm assuming that it gets into the blood in some way. And I said, "You've got to tell the foreman." "No, he knows, and they'll send us back to Texas. We're making $27 an hour." And so we feel that we have to sit here working, knowing that we're doing anyway, you get the idea. In ecological terms, this was an extraordinary place. And so the echoes of the damage went through multiple systems of ecology. The biomass here was the orcas 2 of the orca pods were completely destroyed. The herring fishery. And coastal communities are part of the ecology. The first law of ecology is everything is connected to everything else. Edith and I were talking about that before. The drunken captain. I was told that, yes, he had 3 vodkas that afternoon. The ship sailed at 9 o'clock that night. But that drunk, he was probably a better captain than any other in the Long Beach run. But he was a perfect scapegoat for everyone involved, for the state, for the federal government, and for the fishermen who wanted to get money from Exxon. You say they negligently hired a person who drank. But the truth that our commission came up with was this was a mega system where disaster was certain to happen because of complacency, collusion, and neglect. Complacency, collusion, and neglect. And as you think about that, it's quite predictable that human beings running a mega system, and it's so big, the bigger it is, the bigger the potential hazard, but the bigger the problem of monitoring it. And so it was monitored less. So they went and they said to the Coast Guard, the radar that we said we'd put in there is too expensive. Can we put some, you can't see in fog, but otherwise, and the Coast Guard said, okay, you can have and we were supposed to have a rapid response team there on Broderick Island, but it's going to cost us millions. We can get there from Valdez. The boom, remember, was under ice and snow. Okay, said the Coast Guard. And so this was a mega system where the fishermen knew. The local government was scared stiff of this for a variety of economic reasons as well as health and safety reasons. And all the official players knew that let's keep going. There's been no disaster for 5 years. Therefore, there will never, or whatever. The problem that Rachel told us about was that the systems that produce and manage are short-term thinking. This fiscal year, this quarter, this electoral cycle, depending on who you are. And the world, she didn't use the word sustainability, I think, but it requires long-term thinking. And that's what the Fox School is doing. It's saying, look, students, don't get completely enamored of the joys of the short term unless there is a long-term path that's going to make the public and not just all right, in any event, and by the way, our report had 59 suggestions, but 40 of them would have prevented Deepwater Horizon 20 years later. How many of them do you think were adopted? Correct. Nothing, right? In any event. In subsidiarity terms, decisions were made, some were made in the International Maritime Organization, which is rather dependent on the most powerful nations and companies in the world. The Alaska state government, I think it was at the time 83% of the government's finances came from oil. Plus every Alaskan was given a dividend every year of, it varied, but it would average $800 a year. Do you realize the political power of that? And then you had the US federal government, the Coast Guard, but also the EPA, also the Department of Interior, probably Lou could think of 2 or 3 other agencies, but no one wanted to get into the arguments that they would have. And the tribes knew what was going on. They had a lot of maritime activity. The municipalities did, and the fishermen did. They knew that it was coming and knew that they knew that the ships had to be loaded better. They knew that they should be double hulled, but also for response. There was no logical plan in response. It was the fishermen who knew which way the wind blew. It was the fishermen who knew where the currents went. It was the fishermen who actually did the boom for Exxon. And so BP in Houston dominated the system and expressed surprise that a drunken captain could have done such a thing to the pipeline. I tell my students, graphics, graphics, graphics. In the Supreme Court, Justice Powell said, this little fish, can you eat it? Can you use it for bait? And I said, well, no, Your Honor, but as Exhibit 12 at trial would show, there's beautiful lithograph, this little fish lives in shallow, clear, cool, fast-flowing water, which has been eliminated do you know how many dams on the Tennessee River system? 68. And so this is the last place. This is the canary in the coal mine. But I'd given a stack of, I'm getting to the other story. I didn't know I was going to talk about the fish. It's going to be on my gravestone, right? And by the way, the fish was a canary in the coal mine because it showed that the valley that was being taken, mostly not to flood, but to condemn it and sell it to Boeing, was worth millions of dollars a year, like the White River in Arkansas, which gave us white water. And without the fish, there was no legal way to bring the economics. So the little fish was not an eco-extreme fish. It was saving. How did I get on this? In any event, as you can imagine. But my students heard this from me. And just as I was pleased I did what I said in the Supreme Court to have that graphic available, because the clerk of the court got up and handed it to each one of the justices as I was arguing. They said, looking at the records, Professor, there are problems up on the North Slope. Leaks, and the natural gas is supposed to be re-injected, and they're not, they're just blowing it up. Talk about climate, that has to be in everything we think about. Every course, I'm sure there's some climate connection. The pipeline is leaking in some places. The pumping stations along the way and there was a whistleblower who said, this machinery is broken and it's a bad design, and she was a whistleblower and got fired and committed suicide. When the pipeline came down into Valdez, it was in those tanks, no fire control plan for tanks of hot oil sitting there and venting gas, of course, that could explode. And then we talked about the loading. I mean, just having expert loading of the Exxon Valdez, I don't think it would have happened. And of course, there would have had to be a plan if something did happen. And then there's the run to Los Angeles. The commission was only going to talk about the ships. My students cribbed this from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and then they drew these little vignettes and sent it up to Alaska. I was back in Boston with them, and I said, let's see what this does. It changed the commission. It no longer was a commission looking only at ship traffic. And these were students who learned what they'd learned on the fly. They hadn't graduated. Do you get where I'm going with that? In any event, when you want to think about subsidiarity, it's important, as you can imagine, to have the decision makers getting information from the real world. In higher education now, we're seeing often between top-down governance and shared collegial governance. And I regret to say that most schools I've been seeing here, that the faculty is involved in thinking about everything that goes on, it unfortunately is going toward top-down, which means they don't know what they're doing. They tried to throw the fishermen out of the headquarters in Alaska. When I went to Washington, they said, you have to realize, governance is dominated by iron triangles. I said, well, what's an iron triangle? Somebody here from the political science department? It used to be, they talk about networks now, but you want to know power. This is what runs, and it's not just the oil and gas, mining, timber, dams, highways, big pharma, big banking, home building, agriculture, of course, water districts. And each of them has a money source that produces campaign finance and media blasts and buys newspapers or whatever. And furthermore, you have the agency that's in charge of taking the statute and doing something with it. But if you're in the agency, if you're reasonable during your time in the agency, in regulating the industry, where's the best place for you to retire when you get your pension at the age of 42 and want to quintuple your salary? Agency capture, and also the revolving door. We talk about it in political science. I saw it. It's real. It's extraordinary how agencies, all right, and then there is the congressional clique. I think of Pacific Northwest Timber. So you've got the timber industry, Weyerhaeuser, down in North Carolina, but started up in the Pacific North. Then you have the Forest Service of the United States. In the Department of Interior? No. In EPA? No. Department of Agriculture. Trees are a commodity. And then you have a clique. All right, so this is the Appropriations Committee. I wanted to take a picture of the Pork Committee, which ultimately killed my case. And so this is Tom Bevel. He was the chair. And I said, okay. Oh, and then I looked to get a sense of the politics. Do you know who this is? Who was visiting the Pork Committee in Congress? Bull Connor, from Birmingham, the guy who had you were too young, but the little kids were going in a voting march, and he sicked dogs on them and sprayed them with fire hoses. So you get a sense of the politics that can take over a triangle. The triangle is the strongest geometric figure. All right, so I think only one other theme I wanted to talk about, but iron triangles obviously are going to be as invisible as they can be, which is why My Little Fish was so dangerous. Because if the project was stopped to consider whether the project is worthwhile, they'll look at the economics. And one after another, the triangles do not want the public to see the profits that are taken into the triangle and the bad stuff, the pollution or whatever that's externalized. In any event, I have to say this. There is another principle that I think Eden Hall and the Falk School hold dear, although they don't know it. It takes a huge amount of work for a public protection regulation to be passed. Just a huge amount. And as soon as you are able to pass, maybe you've got a good disaster that helps to shape it. As soon as you have it, or while you're trying to make the rule, the people who cause the need for the rule will be trying to dilute it. Once it's in effect, immediately there will be a process of erosion, agency capture, the whole thing. The wonderful thing is the 1960s didn't just bring you good music, young people, but it brought an opening of the dipolar system. So it's not just the economy and the agency protecting us against, but citizens able to come into the agencies and into courts to try to prevent regression. And Marcel Prieur is from Limoges in France. And he is talking about the non-regression principle that I'd never heard of before a student from France said, "Oh, Marcel Prieur." I said, "Oh, yes, up yours too." But no, I shouldn't have said that. He went to Brazil, and it's now been adopted by the Brazilian Supreme Court. I'm sure that the present president doesn't care much about it. But the point being, do you see that getting protective regulation is so difficult? This is the first year of the Trump administration. When I hear people saying all the good things that Mr. Trump did, I said, you mean deregulate, right? Because the Federalist Society, which has been planning the culmination of power since the Goldwater defeat, but also picking now a third of the federal judges and a majority on the Supreme Court. Yes, abortion. In 1973, they talked with Jerry Falwell. And Jerry Falwell said, if you give up the woman's choice, libertarian stuff in the Republican Party at that time, go for family values and abortion banning, and we will bring millions of evangelicals who've never voted before. And then, guns, Second Amendment. And what else? Immigration. And what else? PTAs, obscene books like To Kill a Mockingbird. But the agenda is deregulation. That's what motivates it. And I don't think I'm radical in saying that, but this chart blew my mind. It was done by two people in the first year of the Trump administration. And you can see environment wins, right? We get attacked more than anyone else. These are regulations which were attacked in the first year, reflecting the agenda, most of them hurting people who vote Trump. You know, it's really hard. I can't pretend to be neutral when I teach any longer, and it's very hard. If you're teaching environmental protection, it's hard to teach why non-protection is a good idea. But the point being, you have to pin it down. And with lawyers, I say, look, the red over on the left is executive orders. He could do that with a stroke of a pen. Biden could reverse it as he did on the 21st of January. The gold is agency rulemaking or de-rulemaking. And it turns out that a lot of those were attacked by citizens saying you didn't follow the rules. So of the 40 rules that the Trump people had killed, 39 of them came back to life. But if you can see, there already were 70 and by now 153. Look, labor and finance, healthcare, civil rights, worker and consumer safety, government reform, immigration, education. That's the agenda of governance of a huge chunk of our country. And you see why I love this chart. You can say, all right, what do you care about? Whatever you care about has been targeted for elimination or dilution. And the Biden administration, have you heard there's somebody called Mitch McConnell? It's extremely difficult to get legislation, but the agencies are afraid to go against the political winds. Mr. Biden, bless his heart, in any event, this was early on, and that shows you each of those is a public protection regulation that is slated to be destroyed. That's Mr. Pruitt, EPA down at the bottom. So my point is this. In my own experience, as Lou was saying, students are extraordinarily motivated to do something meaningful, to do something, not just to sit and learn something. So policy is wonderful, but what can we do that can help implement good things, right? And so for Deepwater Horizon, I said I need 10 people, and I got 37. And they did 20 white papers for the Obama Commission's oil spill commission. And I got a call within hours after the students sent their papers. Thank God for your students. They raised questions like something on dispersants that were actually being made by BP and that we could not raise politically until your citizen students raised the point. Do you see? The extraordinary thing is, how do you find the pressure points so that young people don't just feel dismal? One of the graduate students at Eden Hall said, what can we do? Everything is so depressing. Do what Rachel did. She was not popular. The courage that made her stay, do you remember the testimony that she gave in the Senate while she was dying? Oh my God. But that is the model for long-term thinking. Don't get caught by short-term politics. There will be a way to make a difference, and you'll feel good on the day you turn your toes up to the daisies. I can't remember what I put next. Some of the students were asking, well, what can we do at Eden Hall? And I said, well, most lawyers don't know about the Federal Administrative Procedures Act, Section 553E. And look at it. Each agency shall give an interested person the right to petition for the issuance, amendment, or repeal of a rule. So if in your policy course you've realized what should be done and the agency is not doing it, you write a rule. The agency shall measure pollution in a way that it cannot be fraudulently detoured. That's actually a real example. And you put a good title on it, saying protecting babies from chemicals in baby food or something like that, because as soon as this is sent, you do a press release with graphics that the reporters say, this is a story. And the agency, but the agency legally has to consider it. And the agencies will tend to deny, but under the law, they have to have a rational basis for denying it, so that you can not only bootstrap students, and it used to cost them a postage stamp. You don't have to have a lawyer. And the wonder is it's done so rarely. Have you heard about the Juliana case, the young people suing the federal government and the various states? So I've been working with them for a number of years, and they said, oh, on Mother's Day 2011 or something like that, we want to have legal actions in 50 states and the federal government. And I said, that sounds good, that sounds good. And they said, but we can find only 8 lawyers in 8 states willing to do it. And so my Environmental Law Society and I said, why don't you do, in the federal government, 553E, and in every state, there's an equivalent petition process. And so you can create, and don't just ask for it to be done, draft the damn paragraph so that you're likely to shape the fight. And they said, can we do that? And some of them were undergrads. We're undergrads. Yes. You're a person, right? And so I did this for the little fish. I petitioned for the listing of the fish, and it hadn't been done before. So I said, number one, the fish, I didn't know I was going to do this. The fish currently known as the snail darter exists. I thought, that's a good way to start. How do I prove it? I said, put in an appendix. What do you put in the appendix? A photo of the fish and a description of the fish. Number two, the fish's only known location in the project is the project area of the Little Tennessee River, a unique riverine habitat. What do? A map, a picture, right? And that's true. Number three, the existing habitat appears to be critical to the continued existence of the species. Why? It used to live, after 68 dams, this was the last place where there was a survivable population of the fish. Number four, available scientific evidence indicates that the TVA Tellico project will destroy the habitat. When you have a dam, sediment, mud, goes over the eggs and they die. And TVA knows about the fish, and it's continuing. In fact, they moved from 1 shift a day, cutting trees, burning houses, to 3 shifts a day under those lights, that football teams practice under, before I could get it listed. I don't have time to tell you the politics. The biologists I was working with said, no senator has ever come into my office and asked me whether I really was going to list a species. This was Stennis. I don't know. He was the most powerful Southern senator there was on the pork committees. Nothing was happening. Should I tell the story? I tell my students, the reason I got it listed was adultery. What? In Washington, you learn, first of all, nothing is like the civics books, but these people are human, right? And the Mrs. Leggett that the chairman of the Endangered Species Committee was introducing in San Diego was different from the Mrs. Leggett he was introducing in Washington. It's adultery. And the newspapers had found out about it. And so he was not going to get reelected. And then I said to him, your staff has been asking the Department of Interior for 5 months why they're not moving. My staff, and they didn't answer. Get me the Secretary of Interior. You want to know where real power is. So this congressman says, if the snail darter isn't listed next week, You're going to have an oversight hearing explaining why you're not enforcing the Endangered Species Act. Bang! I heard this. I thought, whoa. And the next week, it was listed. That's put adultery into your book of. Anyway, here in Pennsylvania, Tom Wolfe. My link with Tom Wolfe is that my brother's a falconer, and he's taken Tom Wolfe out falconing. Tom Wolfe said, we need that petition before it was done in many states, here in Pennsylvania. And so, look, it's actually, there is a petition form. You fill out your name, your mailing address, your telephone number, your date. You request the board to adopt a regulation, amend a regulation, or repeal a regulation. You address it to the EQB, and that there will be an agency somewhere that handles that problem. Why is the petitioner requesting this action? The only thing it doesn't ask for is a title to the petition. But do you see why for the reporters? You want to make a title that this is important, this is good. I think this is the rule that reversed the fracking Industries Act 13 in the Pennsylvania legislature. Okay, climate. Thank you, young people, for being here, and because we need you. And environmental justice has to be part of everything that Eden Hall does. But it's easy, you know, climate and environmental justice, if the first law of ecology is everything's connected to everything else, it's everywhere. And I think, yeah, Rachel says, take care of it, kids. Yeah, I was going to have notes, but I forgot we're using my computer that has the notes on it. All right, so it says conversation. Do you see the theme that governance is too important to leave up to the official government? But you have to do the science accurately. If you have people who file a petition that doesn't have its work done, then it becomes discredited immediately. The Eden Hall petition on air pollution monitoring requirements or something. Oh, it's based on something wrong. Boom. And all it takes is one problem. So it really is the kind of thing that an academic community does better. My friends in corporations say, it's just a short perspective here. It's this quarter. And TVA people said, you know, this is terrible what we're doing, but the bosses are insisting on it. We have to do it. Shall I say? I did this with the students last night. All right, we're informal. I said, why are the old guys insisting on a dam that makes no economic sense? And they said, the guy I was talking to actually said, it's male menopause. These guys came down from the north as liberals, and they created this gigantic utility company, and they were bringing these uncivilized people into civilization, and the people are starting to question the projects that they are building. They're getting hot flashes that the children are talking back, or words almost to that extent. But that's true. The agencies are run by human beings, and many of them are old farts. And so they are moving in a world that requires the interposition. But in TVA, you couldn't get information to come up to the top unless it fit exactly what the top wanted. That's starting to happen in some universities. I mean, the joy of an academic community is you can draw on so many different things. How many, Edith? There are like probably 30 faculty members that could be pulled in on almost anything. So it seems to me is the challenge that we give the young and ourselves as well an opportunity. If you do it right, if you study hard and make a good decision on what can be done, and you pinpoint it, and you use the media, and have I mentioned graphics? It seems to me that, I said to Zaina, you don't have to be dismal. Even if you lose on some of these, it feels good causing people to fear you because you're telling the truth. And sometimes you win. Questions. I am sure that I made a mistake somewhere. I used a word I didn't plan on using. But it's a serious enterprise we're about. It really is, because the iron triangles are everywhere. And it's not just federal. It's in the state government and sometimes in the municipal governments. But here in Pennsylvania, the townships were saying, we want to control fracking in our area. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, localities cannot be banned from monitoring and regulating fracking. So that was a victory. We could be dismal, but do you see flashes of light? When David talks about Rachel Carson was superb in science, but also superb in delivering the message. The New Yorker helped, right? The reporters said, this is significant. It is not just a fad. And she remade, it's interesting. I should wait 17 seconds for somebody to ask a question, but I just got to say, within an 18-month period, 3 books were written or were published that changed the way we think of life on this earth, governance of this country. 1962, Rachel Carson. You know the other 2? Feminine Mystique in, I think, 61. Jane Jacobs, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. All 3 have something in common. What do they have in common? Oh yeah, they were all rejected from academic positions. But we needed the women to get out of the silos and look at reality across the board. And so you are chronicling a champion. And it's not just in America, I mean, all over the world. Questions. I didn't mean to be so grandiose. Aparna. Oh, Edith.
I'll throw a cog into this.
Oh, good.
The fourth estate, you keep bringing up the media. The media isn't what the media used to be.
It depends.
No, nobody's listening.
Oh, do you see how easy it is to be dismal?
Cities don't have boards overseeing their city council. States don't have journalists overseeing state government.
Have you heard of webcams? Have you heard of iPhones? There are ways of getting things out now that never were gotten out before. And it's true. I mean, the iron triangles know how to use social media as well. But it seems to me, I tell my students, find an intelligent reporter with an intelligent editor and have that person understand what you're working on and trust you. And I said this to some of the students. If you've done your science and you give somebody a fact and it turns out to be wrong, make sure you're the first person, not the second person, to get to the reporter to correct the fact. All you have is credibility. You don't have money, you don't have media support, you don't have power. But if, I remember one reporter saying, they didn't want to do this story, but I put the heading on it, the Endangered Species Act is causing a pork panic on Capitol Hill. So we had to run it. So if you have something that's a hook, and sometimes a photo that really grabs the editor, in it goes. And it works. Social media also has things that grab and don't grab. My thought is they can tell us how to handle the newest communication, but if we do it right, the information doesn't have to stay in a little cyst. It can go out and pollute the entire democracy. The plutocracy is basically what the Iron Triangle is, right? And a plutocracy is a kleptocracy that's out in the open. And you're right. It's really tough. But the attention span has gotten smaller. But it seems to me the passion span continues to be there if you hit it right. I also tell students, when you're dealing with people inside an agency, hide their identity. They have to trust that you're not going to reveal them, even if what they're revealing to you is something that everyone should be able to know. I have stories about that too, but I have stories for almost anything. And Edith, I have some stories about how to grab the media when they don't want to be grabbed.
It isn't all owned by one or two companies that own
Oh,
12%
the concentration of media is just heartbreaking. But there are alternatives. If I were 14, I'd know more about the alternatives, but other ideas. Aparna.
I had not really questions, just to discuss. And I'm a new faculty. I'm housed in business department. I work on environment, but I didn't meet all the people up until now. So
But post Dust Bowl is one thing that you see, Edith, that grabs people.
So my question, or my confusion, when we talk about interest groups, pressure from different interest group and this petition through different interest group, do you see that it can also happen that with this interest group pressure, we are creating a new kind of environmental justice because the people who don't have power or who don't have the knowledge to think about these issues, they are not going and writing all these things. It's only being concentrated in population who knows better.
I have a weird answer. Environmental justice is everywhere if you look, and there it is. And I have a friend, Rebecca Bratspies, who is a professor at CUNY in New York. I'll send you some of her things, because she walked into some of these disempowered communities and said, I told you, Darnell, about this. I'm a white lady, but my students and I might be able to do something that would help you address problems you have. Do you have problems that you think should be looked into and don't know how to do it or are having problems? And they sat down and they decided, first of all, that they had some stories to tell. And how would they get the stories around the community? You're going to laugh at this. Comic books. That they produced one on how to use the Freedom of Information Act to get information out of governments that don't want to give it to you. Federal, state, and local. You can imagine how that, all right. Another one was census. Make sure you're counted. Another one, Maya's Lot. The community had a garden and a chemical plant wanted to come in and, it was an illegal garden, right? It was probably a vacant lot. And they managed to organize without one of these country club NGOs coming in and the story of that, how to do it, people who had never gone to law school, how to come before a board of commissioners and embarrass them with the truth. And it happens to be a true story. And so comic books, what do we say? Graphic instructional, graphic novellas or something. But there are ways. And Fred Tutman, you should bring him to Eden Hall. He's the only African-American river keeper in the United States. There are 220 river keepers. The Patuxent River in Washington district. And he said, an environmental group has got to be of the community, not of the country club. How do you put together an organization that will do things with people who are like everyone else in the community? And my students have just been spellbound, not only by his story, but also by how to do it. And most of them are white. How to be like Rebecca. Say, look, I'm not telling you what you need. I'm asking what problems you have and then thinking with you, what do you want to do and whether we can help. I mean, Freedom of Information Act, just write that. Yeah. Oh, you need a lawyer. No, you don't need a lawyer. What? This is how you do it. What? And these are people, many of them, who never gone to high school. I mean, never gotten out of high school. No, you're putting your finger on something really important. And remember, part of your Dust Bowl story is Grapes of Wrath. That really got people thinking about environmental justice for white Okies.
We probably have time for one more question before we continue the conversation.
And do we have some wet stuff to drink next door?
We do. We have multiple wet things to drink next door. I knew there'd be a question.
I was just curious if you could elaborate. You mentioned the Boston College program that you thought might be a fit for Eden Hall.
I started it actually at Michigan. Joseph Sachs was the first environmental law professor, and very much a guy who said, an environmental law society is not what its bylaws, it's what it does. So what are you going to do? And one of the things that I did with a buddy, grad student, was we selected, I think, 10 people who knew enough about environmental law, and some of them knew something about science, thank God. And we said, all right, we're going to put you in pairs, and the college as an experiment will give you 25 undergrads. Oh, and also grads, one public health doctor as well would come and take these classes taught by third-year law students. And I would look at the syllabi to make sure that they were doing something competent and worthwhile. But each group did its own syllabus, and the students would say, these teachers, first of all, more like us, but have the authority of what they know. And they don't know everything, but they're asking questions, they're working. They learn. Many undergrads came to us because they always were able to give the right answer. But in real life, there's often no right answer. You have to know what the 3 or 4 different ways of approaching a problem. And that's what environmental law does in virtually every area. And so the students would say, this was the best course I had at the University of Michigan. And we didn't pass that on to the faculty. And then when I got my doctorate, I carried it with me to Tennessee. And the strip miners were not happy about it, but that was one of the action things. Lou was talking about student work. On the Supreme Court case, there were a dozen students on the steps of the Supreme Court at 4 in the morning. Because if you don't get in the first 100, you can only stay 5 minutes. The cop comes up, what are you doing here? We're from Tennessee. We worked on this case, and we don't want to have to stay only 5 minutes. Well, behave yourselves. And that wouldn't be the same today, I'm sure. But they represented probably 200 students working. And I'm guessing that between 30 and 40% were undergrads who took the course, not law students and not physics students and the other volunteers. So the point is, I'm thinking that I have now pushed, so after Tennessee, I took it to Wayne State and I brought it to Boston. I've now started it at the University of Maine. I shouldn't say I. There are students who are making it work at the University of Maine and students at Stetson. I think they're teaching at the University of Southern Florida. But it's the kind of thing that is electrifying, not just for the teachers. Those of you who teach, you know, you never learn so much as when you stand up and have to teach something. But their students are learning the legal process, how to say to an attorney who's saying, no, you can't do that. Why? Should I tell the story? I can do it in 1 minute, I think. We were doing a bottle bill in Michigan, and we had a bill that we brought to the state capitol, and the hearing was going on, and the students were giving the bottle bill, which actually became the national bottle bill thereafter. But the point was, Continental Can Company represented the throwaway bottle group. And they came in and they said, these students are really very nice. We believe in environment, but they didn't know that this has been preempted by federal law. At which point, one of the undergrads who never went to law school was probably stoned, because he was always stoned when I knew him. He said, you're saying it's preempted, and we were taught it has to be either express or implied, and I don't see it expressed, so how is it impliedly preempted? And the chairman said, yeah, why is it impliedly? And the attorney said, well, I'll get back to you. Of course, and the commission would have gone with the lobbyist group if it hadn't been for a kid standing up. I might have stood up if none of my students did, but just to give you a sense of the high level of law that I taught them. The name of the lead attorney on the lobby group was, I think, Rudolph Lederer. And I said to the students, whenever you refer to an argument, you say, as the argument was made by Mr. Not Lederer, Litterer. Mr. Litterer. No, it's Lederer. Mr. Litterer is saying the throwaway. So that passes for great law. I wanted you to know that. Anyway, let's get something to drink with bubbles. Thank you, David.